At 82, Billie Jean King is still called by grand titles by Americans. Legend, icon, the woman who changed the history of sports with an old $8 racket. She hoisted 39 Grand Slam trophies, stepped onto the court in the 1973 Battle of the Sexes with the eyes of millions of women watching, and founded the WTA to empower an entire generation of female athletes. The world sees her glory, the Wimbledon spotlight, and articles hailing her as a hero, but few see the shadows behind. At this age, her body is worn by diabetes, insulin shots, her morning companion, her knees battered by too many surgeries, each step a reminder of the cost of victory. Her memory sometimes fades, old faces and glorious matches reduced to fleeting fragments, leaving a vague fear that one day she might forget who she is. On long nights in her quiet California home, Billie Jean King sits alone. No crowd's cheers, only the ticking of a clock, whispering to herself, "The world sees silver trophies, but I see sweat, blood, and broken sleep." The glow of fame no longer warms her in old age, only memories woven with pride and lingering wounds. And that is the tragedy of a legend, conquering the world but unable to defeat the cruelty of time and loneliness. Billie Jean King was born in 1943 inches Long Beach, California, into an ordinary family where her father was a firefighter, her mother a homemaker, and their home filled with the laughter and voices of 14 siblings. A crowded house with no room for privacy, no space for dreams, and certainly no indulgence for a small child. In that home, Billie Jean was always overshadowed, like a drop of water lost in a sea of people, no one imagining that one day this girl would make all of America listen. The 1,950 seconds in America were a time when sports dreams weren't for girls. Society built invisible walls, decreeing that girls should learn to sew, cook, and prepare to be wives and mothers. A child like Billie Jean, daring to run, play, and aspire to the courts, was seen as out of place, unusual. She felt that scorn from the start, when male friends mocked, "What can a girl do with a ball?" Those taunts were like knives carving into a child's soul, leaving scars that never faded, and igniting in Billie Jean a burning hatred for injustice. Her childhood held no gentle warmth, only battles with siblings for a share of food, cold nights squeezed onto a narrow bed. She didn't grow up in luxury but in want, where every meal was a fight, and children's cries were drowned out by the exhaustion of an overworked mother. Billie Jean learned early to be tough, not expecting anyone's protection, because in such a crowded family, love was divided into tiny scraps. At school, she was even more out of place. Gym classes were strictly divided. Boys played soccer, ran track, hit baseballs, girls jumped rope, did aerobics. But Billie Jean didn't want to jump rope, she wanted to swing a bat, fight for the ball, take the field. Every time she stepped toward that world, she was pushed back by teachers' scornful looks and peers' mocking laughter. "Girls can't do that." The phrase echoed so often it became a haunting childhood anthem. But instead of breaking, Billie Jean clenched her teeth, silently vowing that one day she would prove them wrong. As a child, she sought out public parks, where cracked tennis courts lay silent under the California Sunday. No one taught her, no one coached her technique. She had only a cheap racket and worn-out shoes. She played until her hands bled, until sweat soaked her shirt, until her body gave out but she still wouldn't rest, because Billie Jean knew the world would never open its doors unless she broke them down with blood and tears. In her family, her parents rarely encouraged their daughter. Her father, a stoic firefighter, believed strength was a man's privilege. Her mother, tied to the kitchen, believed a girl's fate was marriage. Billie Jean found no encouragement, only reminders, "You're a girl, don't be foolish." In that space full of prejudice, young Billie Jean realized she had to fight from within her own blood, that her chosen path would have no red carpet, only gravel and thorns. Those days were fiercer than any future match. They were days when Billie Jean gritted her teeth through loneliness, scornful looks, material lack, and the absence of love. But from that darkness, she forged an iron will, a belief that if the world wouldn't let women dream, she would live to make that dream real. Billie Jean King's childhood wasn't a story of idyllic afternoons playing with friends, but a mournful song of a child constantly told she was not enough, who then used those very wounds to build an extraordinary life. Billie Jean King never forgot the day she bought her first racket. It wasn't a gift from her parents or a favor from an adult who saw talent in her. It was the result of pennies she scrimped from odd jobs, from collecting bottles, from the few coins she managed to save, pieced together to make $8. To a child, $8 back then was a treasure. But Billie Jean didn't spend it on candy or new clothes. She chose a cheap tennis racket with a rough wooden handle and flimsy strings. She held that racket like it was her entire future, as if gripping it tightly would give her a chance to escape the heavy shadow of a childhood full of limitations. But having a racket didn't mean having a court to practice on. Billie Jean sought out dusty public courts in Long Beach, their surfaces cracked and uneven, their nets tattered, places no one thought could forge a champion. With no professional coach to guide her, she taught herself how to grip the racket, mimicked what little she saw on TV, and hit balls against a wall until her wrists gave out. People often remember greatness at its pinnacle, but few know it began with a small girl standing alone on a public court, sweat dripping onto scorching concrete, hands bloodied from the rough handle. On sweltering summer days, Billie Jean practiced until her skin burned, until her hands blistered and tore. Each swing wasn't just practice, it was a challenge to the world. I'm a girl, but I won't stop. Yet her persistence earned no respect from those around her. Even when she could run as fast and hit as hard as boys her age, she was still dismissed. Boys sneered, "What can a girl do?" Adults shook their heads. "She'll give up. This isn't a game for women." While her bloodied hands were proof of her iron will, the world's eyes saw only a misguided child. That sense of injustice carved itself deep into Billie Jean's soul, a mark that never faded. She realized that no matter how hard she tried, the world would always find ways to deny her, to build walls just because she was a girl. And that pain became fuel, a smoldering fire that drove her to keep fighting. Some nights, Billie Jean returned home with trembling hands, placing the racket on her bed like her only true friend. She wanted to tell someone about the painful practices, the blood soaking into the racket, but no one listened. Her parents were exhausted after long days, her siblings busy with their own lives. She learned to keep her pain to herself, to smile in front of others, then quietly cry when it was just her and the racket. From then on, tennis wasn't just a game, it was where she vented her anger, how she fought back against society's injustice. Each swing was her shouting to the world, "I exist! I'm worthy." The child Billie Jean King wasn't born to be celebrated. She was born to fight, and those invisible battles on cracked public courts, with bloodied hands and a furious heart, laid the foundation for a life that would one day make the world bow. When Billie Jean King stepped off those dusty public courts and into official tournaments, she thought the pain would ease, that her bloodied hands and silent practices had been enough to prove her ambition to the world. But reality was harsher than she imagined. On professional courts, Billie Jean didn't just face opponents across the net. She faced the heavy weight of prejudice bearing down on her. Whispers came from the stands, the press, even her peers. She's too strong, not feminine anymore. In an era when women were expected to be delicate, graceful, demure on the court, Billie Jean arrived with fierce play, explosive shots, sturdy legs, and fiery eyes. Instead of praise, she was seen as a threat to the gender order society clung to. They didn't see her effort, only her otherness. And so, in the locker room, Billie Jean often sat alone in silence. Around her were small groups laughing, lively conversations she was never truly welcomed into. Sometimes, the silence was heavier than the jeering whistles outside. She felt the invisible distance separating her from the rest of women's tennis. the distance of someone who refused to bend to fit society's precast mold. That loneliness often hurt more than any injury. Then, in 1961, Billie Jean King and Karen Hanse won the women's doubles title at Wimbledon, marking her official arrival on the world tennis stage. As the silver trophy was raised, the crowd cheered, the press wrote glowing lines, and Billie Jean smiled, but deep down, it was a smile laced with tears. To reach that moment, she had traded her entire youth. While girls her age went to parties, hung out, experienced first loves, Billie Jean spent her teenage years in strange hotels, on long flights, in cold morning gyms. "People only see the trophy," she once said. "No one sees I lost my youth." Glory came, but it couldn't warm the heart of a girl just entering her 20s, already weathered by invisible battles. The pain was that, even at the peak of glory, the scorn never stopped. They said she was too loud, too strong, not ladylike enough. They laughed when she ran fast, hit powerful shots. To them, Billie Jean wasn't the model of womanhood society wanted, so her victories were tinged with doubt. Instead of being revered, she was watched like an oddity. The injustice cut deeper. Some nights after tournaments, Billie Jean sat in a small hotel room, staring at the trophy on the table, its silver glinting on the ceiling. Some might think it was the light of pride, but to her, it was only the light of sacrifice. Tears fell to the floor, mingling with loneliness. In what should have been her happiest moment, Billie Jean felt only emptiness. The trophy couldn't replace the youth she lost, the empathy she craved, the warm embrace she never got from the society she fought for. She had entered the professional world with all her faith, only to learn it wasn't a paradise but an arena harsher than any nightmare. Each victory was a new wound, each round of applause a reminder that she had to keep fighting alone, that the road ahead would be long and filled with blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. And in that harshness, Billie Jean King grew resilient, but also tragic, carrying voids that could never be filled. Billie Jean King climbed to the highest rungs of world tennis at a pace that stunned the sports world. In the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, she became a name that haunted every opponent, a living monument to strength and will. 39 Grand Slam titles, a number that leaves anyone in awe. Of those, 12 inches singles, 16 inches women's doubles, and 11 inches mixed doubles. At Wimbledon alone, she raised 20 trophies, matching and then standing shoulder to shoulder with the greatest legends in history. The press wrote of her in glowing terms, "Queen of Wimbledon, undying icon." But behind the radiant photos was a life drained to its core, a body bearing silent scars, and a soul that had plummeted to dark depths many times over. Everyone only sees Billie Jean King holding her head high under dazzling lights, but no one sees the journey to get there, built on the erased fragments of her childhood and youth. While her peers enjoyed picnics, dances, and sweet young love, Billie Jean drifted through transcontinental flights, slept briefly in unfamiliar hotels, ate hurried meals before matches, and woke the next morning to push herself through grueling training. From a very young age, she traded what every ordinary girl had the right to keep: her youth. No dances, no carefree love, no days of playful freedom, only the court, the sound of bouncing balls, and the constant fear that a single moment's hesitation could cost her everything. Her body bore the punishment of that glory. Her knees ached constantly, her hands grew calloused, her shoulders and neck worn out. For every title, she paid with a piece of her health. For every silver trophy, she endured another crack in her body. But the cruelest toll was the invisible pressure. Once crowned #1, she wasn't allowed to lose. Every match was not just about personal victory or defeat, but a battle for an entire gender, a burden society heaped on her shoulders. If Billie Jean fails, women fail. The cheers from the crowd were both motivation and a blade held to her throat. She had to be strong, invincible, always winning, though inside, She only wanted to breathe like an ordinary person. In those golden years, Billie Jean King often left the court with a trophy in hand, a smile on her lips, but as soon as the locker room door closed, tears streamed down her face. "Every victory is a loss," she once said. "Every championship trophy, I traded away a piece of my ordinary life." The world cheered, but she melted inside. The world's joy was built on the erosion of a heart that longed for simple things. On flights, Billie Jean often sat by the window, watching clouds drift by. To fans, it might have seemed the image of a romantic star, but in truth, her mind was consumed by bone-deep exhaustion. Her luggage was always heavy with trophies and titles, but her heart was empty. Endless trips made her forget the concept of home. Sometimes, in strange hotels, she asked herself, "Where am I going? Why do I keep doing this? Who will remember me beyond these matches?" The pressure weighed on every relationship. Billie Jean had no time for friends, love, or relaxing evenings. She feared she was losing her ability to love, as her life had turned her into a victory machine, nothing more. While the world called her a goddess, she felt like a lone warrior, without magic, only exhaustion and ceaseless fear. Some nights, Billie Jean lay in the dark, hearing her heart pound in her chest. She remembered the old days, holding her $8 racket on public courts, practicing until her hands bled but still smiling, because back then she had hope. But at the pinnacle, that hope had turned into a burden. The world demanded more, always more. Winning today wasn't enough. She had to win tomorrow and forever. The peak became a prison, the glory a chain. 39 Grand Slams, a number that awed the world, but for Billie Jean, they were 39 sacrifices. 39 times she gave up a piece of an ordinary life. And she, more than anyone, understood that cost. When the stadium lights dimmed, all that remained was a tired woman sitting before a mirror, dark circles under her eyes, quietly asking herself, "I conquered the world, but what's left for me?" The answer was often just silence. Silence of a stolen youth. Silence of ordinary dreams she never had. Silence of a legend who knew that no matter how bright the glory, it could never hide the wounds in her heart. In 1973, Billie Jean King stepped into the match the world called the Battle of the Sexes, a tennis game, but also a social, political, and cultural war far beyond the white lines of the court. Her opponent was Bobby Riggs, a former Wimbledon champion, over 50 but notorious for his arrogance and habit of belittling women. Riggs openly challenged, women could never compete with men. He mocked, insulted, and treated the match as a spectacle to prove women's sports were a joke. American society split in two. One side waited to see Billie Jean fail, to prove the women's rights movement was a delusion. The other placed all their hopes on her small shoulders, believing her victory could amplify the call for equality. That night, the Houston Astrodome's lights blazed. Over 30,000 spectators filled the stands, and 90 million watched on global television, a record for a tennis match. Billie Jean stepped onto the court in a white skirt, her smile resolute. But inside, her heart raced wildly. The pressure was crushing, each step like walking on knives. She knew that losing wouldn't just humiliate her, it could bury the entire equality movement. History would record that defeat as proof women would always be lesser than men. It was no longer just a tennis match. It was a life or death battle for the dignity of half the human race. Billie Jean won 3-0, with scores of 6-4, 6-3, 6-3. The world erupted in cheers. The press called her the heroine of liberation, the immortal symbol of American women. The image of Billie Jean raising her racket, eyes ablaze, became a historic icon etched into America's cultural memory as an era-defining moment. Women across the country wept with joy. Young girls watching on TV that night believed they could become anyone, do anything, if they dared step onto life's court. But when the lights dimmed, the crowd dispersed, and the reporters stopped snapping photos, Billie Jean King returned to a stark, tragic reality. Her body trembled, exhausted, barely able to stand. In the silent locker room, she slumped into a chair, buried her face, and sobbed. These weren't tears of pure joy but of release, of someone who had just escaped a crushing burden, yet knew the nightmare wasn't over. Because if one win could restore faith for millions, it also meant she could never afford to lose again. Beating Riggs made Billie Jean King an icon, but it also made her a prisoner of expectations. Doors of opportunity opened media, politics, endorsements flooded in. She was hailed as a goddess, but behind it all, her body screamed. Her knees ached, muscles strained, sleep cut short by anxiety. At night, she sat alone in dark rooms, her heart pounding, panic rising. She had just lived the greatest night of her career, but felt she was entering the heaviest years of her life. In the years that followed, Billie Jean King admitted the pressure from the battle of the sexes left deep mental scars. She often had nightmares, dreaming of collapsing on the court, hearing the crowd's mocking laughter. Even in later tournaments, each time she stepped onto the court, she felt Riggs's shadow watching, forcing her to prove again and again that women's victories weren't a fluke. The world remembers that win as a triumphant anthem, but Billie Jean remembers it as a turning point, where her life lost its privacy, where every breath, every swing, was tied to the word responsibility. People saw her smile, but no one saw her clutching swollen knees that night, wondering if she could keep going. They heard her speak boldly about women's rights, but no one heard her sobs in cold hotel rooms. The peak of Billie Jean King's career brought no relief, only the start of a long chain of mental nightmares. The world called her a warrior, but no one asked if her heart still had the strength to fight. In history, it's called an immortal moment. But for Billie Jean King, it was also the night she lost a piece of her soul, a piece that even the brightest victory could never restore. After the glow of the battle of the sexes faded, Billie Jean King faced another battle, no longer on the court but in the cold backrooms of sports power. In the early 1970 seconds, the prize money gap between men and women was up to tenfold. A female Grand Slam champion earned a pittance, while a male player in early rounds could pocket more. Billie Jean looked around and saw the truth. Women could bleed, sacrifice, give up their youth, but the sports world saw them as a sideshow. To her, this wasn't just about numbers, it was about honor, about proving women deserved respect. In 1970, alongside 8 other female players, Billie Jean King signed a symbolic contract worth $1. Those 9 women, later known as the Original 9, took a daring risk to step outside the system, challenging the powerful men who dominated tennis. As her pen touched the paper, Billie Jean knew she was entering a battle that could destroy her career, sever sponsorships, and cast her as an outcast. But she signed anyway, because, as she once said, "If we don't stand up now, there will never be another chance." The cost came immediately. Tennis officials threatened bans. The press criticized them as greedy, claiming women weren't capable of sustaining their own tour. Male colleagues mocked, "Who'd pay to watch women play?" Even among women, not everyone supported her. Some players shunned Billie Jean, fearing the fallout. They called her a rebel, a troublemaker, a madwoman daring to defy centuries of tradition. The deepest tragedy was the loneliness that crept into that fight. Friends who once chatted in the locker room now avoided her. Colleagues who once shook her hand turned cold. Billie Jean still had to compete, but looking around, she saw fewer encouraging glances and more skeptical headshakes. In those days, she was both a player and a leader, answering to the press while scrambling for funding. Every swing of her racket wasn't just to beat an opponent but to prove women belonged. That crushing pressure took a toll on her health. Her knees grew increasingly painful, her body exhausted from playing too much to sustain the new tour. Her mind was taut like a string, worrying if there'd be enough money tomorrow, if younger players still believed in her. On long nights, Billie Jean lay awake, her heart racing, thinking of today's victories while fearing everything could collapse with one federation ruling. And bitterly, there were moments when she nearly lost it all. Major sponsors turned away, many venues refused to rent courts, and the media ridiculed her. The world didn't welcome this rebellion, it tried to strangle it in its cradle. Billie Jean King stood at the storm's center, absorbing every attack, and sometimes she collapsed in the locker room, crying silently. The press saw a heroine, but she knew she was just a human torn between ideals and exhaustion. Yet, as always, Billie Jean didn't give up. She kept playing, fighting, building a system that would become the Women's Tennis Association WTA. That name is a source of pride today, but few remember it was built on Billie Jean King's blood, tears, and youth. Every dollar, every small tournament, every convincing win was a brick stacked to form a solid empire. And on each brick were the scars she endured. When the WTA was officially recognized, when female players began receiving the respect they deserved, the world applauded. But in that moment, Billie Jean King felt only boundless exhaustion. She had given her health, her youth, her personal peace to buy a foundation of equality for future women. The glory was shared, but the pain was hers alone. And as she watched the WTA become a global symbol, Billie Jean King understood a tragic truth. To build an empire, she had to sacrifice her own peace. After years of throwing herself into the fight for the WTA, Billie Jean King stepped into another role, that of a wife. She married Larry King in 1965, not the famous TV host, but a kind, intelligent young man who'd been with her since her youth. To the outside world, their marriage looked perfect. A successful female athlete, an intellectual husband supporting her career. People saw them hand in hand at events, smiling for cameras as if Billie Jean had it all. Fame, career, family. But behind that curtain was a chilling coldness. Billie Jean King never truly loved Larry. She respected him, was grateful for his support, but love, the fiery passion sung about in songs and novels, never existed in their marriage. Their bond was more like an agreement, a way for Billie Jean to fit the social standard America imposed at the time. A successful woman still had to marry, have a husband, maintain the facade of a happy family. Meanwhile, her heart yearned for something else, a longing she hadn't dared admit even to herself. On long nights, when Larry was asleep, Billie Jean lay facing the darkness, eyes wide open, listening to her husband's steady breathing. Sometimes, she'd glance at the peaceful face of the man who'd shared her early years. Then a question would surge in her mind, unshakable. Is this the life I want? That question echoed, becoming an obsession that stole her sleep, making her mornings feel like she was surviving, not living. Their cold marriage held no loud arguments or blatant betrayals. It was like a winter room, silent, orderly, but so cold it numbed. Billie Jean tried to play the dutiful wife, appearing beside Larry when needed, but the invisible gap between them grew. She craved a real touch, a look that quickened her pulse, a feeling of being truly understood, but all that remained was emptiness. Social pressure made it suffocating. As a public symbol of women, she had to maintain a proper image. Strong on the court, successful in her career, happy in marriage. The media then wasn't open enough to accept a famous female athlete living differently, let alone one who might love women. Billie Jean knew, admitting the truth could destroy her career, erase her legacy. So she chose silence, imprisoning her heart in a loveless marriage. The tragedy wasn't just in the pretense, but in the sense of losing herself. Billie Jean King, who dared challenge the male-dominated tennis system, who stood up for women's equality, couldn't face her own heart. She became a prisoner of norms, trapped in the walls of marriage, falling into a spiral of doubt each night. Will I ever live authentically? In those years, the more success she achieved on the court, the deeper she sank into personal loneliness. People saw a champion, but no one saw a woman quietly crying in her own bedroom. Her marriage to Larry King wasn't a loud tragedy, but a silent one, where her heart froze, where her longing to love and be loved remained unfulfilled. And in that coldness, Billie Jean King began to realize her greatest battles weren't just on the court but in the darkness of her room, where she faced the truth that her heart had been out of tune for a long time. The cold marriage to Larry King continued like a mask, until the buried longings in Billie Jean King's heart erupted, no longer containable. In the darkness of her loneliness, she found what she'd craved for so long, the feeling of being seen, touched by true love. That person was Marilyn Barnett, her personal secretary, companion, someone Billie Jean could share her deepest feelings with, feelings she'd never dared voice. Between them was not just closeness but understanding and comfort, a warmth Billie Jean had never felt in her marriage. With Barnett, she didn't need to play the legend or the perfect wife. She could be Billie Jean, vulnerable, exhausted, yearning to be loved. But that love, instead of being a refuge, became a fatal wound in her life. In 1981, Marilyn Barnett filed a palimony lawsuit that shook America. Barnett claimed a right to part of Billie Jean King's assets, presenting evidence of their romantic relationship, private letters, receipts, intimate details no one else knew. Overnight, Billie Jean's illustrious career and steadfast icon status were rocked. The press pounced like predators, dissecting every line, every word, turning a personal story into public entertainment. Everything Billie Jean had hidden, her identity, her true love, her deepest emotions, was laid bare under a spotlight she never wanted. In early 1982 America, homosexuality was still a cursed word, tied to stigma, mockery, even disgust. For a top female star, a Grand Slam champion, a global sports icon, to be revealed as gay was a seismic scandal. Millions of fans were stunned, the press sensationalized it, and many turned their backs. Major endorsement deals were canceled instantly. Brands that once hailed her as an icon coldly severed ties. Millions of dollars vanished in a flash. The world that had celebrated Billie Jean King as a feminist symbol was now ready to stone her, mock her, turn her into barroom gossip, dinner table talk, and tabloid fodder. But the greatest loss wasn't in money or fame. The greatest loss was privacy and trust. The person she had loved, believed to be a safe haven, turned that love into a weapon, memories into evidence, and Billie Jean's heart into a battlefield. From lover, Marilyn Barnett became a betrayer. The pain of that loss cut deeper than any defeat on the court. Billie Jean King once admitted, "Back then, I felt I had nothing left. I had lost everything." The image of her slumped over a table, shoulders trembling, face buried in her hands, is the most tragic portrait of a legend who once stood tall before thousands. The Barnett scandal wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a public wound, stripping Billie Jean of every protective layer she'd built. In an era when homosexuality was taboo, she was forced to acknowledge her sexual orientation not with agency or freedom, but under coercion and humiliation. The world didn't embrace her admission. It used it to mock, degrade, and wound her further. In those dark months, Billie Jean still had to step onto the court. But each time she held her racket, she no longer heard applause, only whispers, "That's the gay one. That's the liar." Every swing, instead of bringing pride, became a desperate effort to prove she still had value, that she hadn't fallen. Yet even on the court, loneliness enveloped her, as once close colleagues now looked at her with unfamiliar eyes. Some turned away, others kept their distance. Even in the world she'd devoted her youth to protecting, she became an outsider. The mental strain left Billie Jean exhausted. She sought therapy, struggling to keep her mind from collapsing. But at night, when the lights and noise faded, loneliness surged, and wounds bled anew. She had once defeated Bobby Riggs in a match the world watched, but in this internal battle, she had no one by her side. The Barnett shock took more than money and fame. It stole her belief that love could be a safe place. And from that pain, Billie Jean entered a new chapter of her life, but never again as the whole person she once was. She continued fighting for gender equality, for women's and gay rights, but now her voice carried the weight of a heart once betrayed. Billie Jean King's tennis victories are legendary, but the years after the Barnett scandal prove that even legends can fall in tears, that glory is sometimes a fragile shell hiding a deeply wounded soul. After the Barnett storm, Billie Jean King thought she had lost everything. Her reputation trampled, finances shaken, career threatened, and heart bleeding from betrayal. Yet in those ashes, a small flame flickered her love for Ilana Kloss. Ilana, a former player from South Africa, much younger than Billie Jean, entered her life not with fanfare or calculation but with gentleness, patience, and rare loyalty. If Barnett had turned love into a blade, Ilana turned it into a bandage, gently wrapping Billie Jean's unhealed wounds. They began as soulmates, then became life partners, rebuilding a life that seemed shattered. They didn't just share love, but built a career together off the court, managing sports projects, engaging in community work, even co-owning prestigious teams. In Ilana, Billie Jean found the solace she'd craved for years, a hand that held tight, a gaze without judgment, a shoulder to lean on when she faltered. Ilana was the one who pulled Billie Jean back up, the gentle pulse in a once-broken heart. Yet, as genuine and enduring as their love was, it was never fully accepted by society. In the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, America wasn't ready to embrace same-sex love stories. Billie Jean and Ilana lived cautiously, dodging media spotlights and prying eyes. They walked together but couldn't hold hands in crowded streets, shared a home but couldn't openly call each other partners. Their love was like a beautiful song forced to be sung in whispers, never allowed to ring out fully. Billie Jean often realized bitterly, defeating Bobby Riggs could make the world tip its hat. Founding the WTA could change women's sports forever, but even a legend like her couldn't make society accept her true love. The tragedy lay in this. Love existed, but it was always shadowed by stigma and scrutiny. Even with Ilana by her side, Billie Jean carried the pain of never fully living authentically, the pain of a heart that loved but had to love in silence. Some nights, as they sat in the living room, Billie Jean watched Ilana intently sorting papers or smiling softly, and a mixed feeling welled up, gratitude for finding a true companion, but also pain that their love couldn't stand tall before the world. In those moments, she thought, love saved me, but it can't erase the scars. The scars of the Barnett lawsuit, of years living in pretense, of society's judgment, remained etched, like permanent cracks in a mirror. Still, Billie Jean and Ilana endured together. They traveled the world, joined charity efforts, appeared behind the scenes at major tournaments, and became each other's anchor through every storm. Without Ilana, Billie Jean might have fallen for good after the scandal. But with that love, she found a reason to keep going, to fight not just on the tennis court but in social battles. Ilana couldn't erase the past, but she helped Billie Jean live with it, turning scars into part of her strength. And so, Billie Jean King's life went on not as an invincible legend, but as a human with a heart once crushed, then mended by love. Yet she knew that, though mended, the scars would never vanish. Love saved her, but it couldn't restore her lost youth, tarnished fame, or stolen privacy. It could only offer something simpler warmth so she no longer trembled in the dark alone. And perhaps that was enough for Billie Jean King to keep breathing, living, and standing proud in a world never truly generous to her heart. Billie Jean King was used to battles on the court, where she knew her opponent across the net, the rules of the game, and what it took to win. But as age crept in, she discovered a crueler enemy, a battle with no audience, no cheers, and no scoreboard to decide victory. That was the fight against her own body. If her youth saw her defeat Riggs, win 39 Grand Slams, and found the WTA, her later years were marked by silent collapses, struggling within a body that gradually betrayed her. The first illness Billie Jean faced was type 2 diabetes. For many, it's a health concern, but for an athlete accustomed to a vibrant body, It was a quiet death sentence. Each day, she injected insulin to stabilize her blood sugar, the needle an unwilling companion. She once admitted bitterly, "I was used to holding a racket, but never to holding a needle." In the quiet mornings of her empty home, Billie Jean King watched the needle pierce her skin, sighing as she realized her glorious life had narrowed to these silent injections. But diabetes wasn't her only burden. She also faced a subtler enemy, an eating disorder. For years, she battled binge eating, torn by guilt and shame. The disorder led to multiple hospitalizations, days spent in medical centers like a mental health patient, no trace of the grass court queen. People remember Billie Jean King as a warrior, but few know of nights she sat alone in her kitchen, staring at a plate of food like an enemy, wanting to devour it and throw it away at once. This illness had no finish line. It was an endless battle where the enemy lived in her mind. Yet Billie Jean's tragedy didn't end there. The knees that once carried her across courts, enabling agile moves to win points, became a source of constant pain. Multiple surgeries, cutting, stitching, bracing, never banished the ache. Each morning's first step was agony. She once said, "I used to call the court my home, but now every step reminds me how much I've sacrificed." Her knees, shoulders, back all seemed to betray her in unison, turning her body into a burden. Old age doesn't just bring physical pain. It instills in Billie Jean a far more terrifying fear. The fear of fading memory. Her parents both suffered from dementia, and Billie Jean worries she's treading the same path. Some days, she forgets the name of an old friend, forgets what she was just about to do, or gets lost in a story. For someone who once relied on sharpness to fight, the sensation of losing memory cuts like a deep wound. Each memory is a victory, a lesson, a piece of her legacy, and now they're slipping away like sand through her fingers. All of it diabetes, eating disorders, endless surgeries, fading memory combines into a harsh sentence. Billie Jean King, who once conquered the world, is now losing to her own body. "I won on the court," she chokes out, "but I'm losing to my own body." Those words are not just a bitter admission, but the cry of a once proud person forced to face the truth. No champion can defeat time. Some nights, Billie Jean sits in front of the mirror, staring at a face etched with wrinkles, sunken eyes, trembling hands. She remembers the old days, stepping onto the court with an $8 racket, blood on her hands but fire in her heart. Now, the blood remains, but only from injections. Her heart still beats, but no longer for the thrill of victory now. It's for the fear that tomorrow another piece of her memory will vanish. The world still celebrates Billie Jean King as an immortal icon, but in the silence of old age, she knows she's become a prisoner of her own body. A life built on victories has turned into a series of defeats, losing to each step, each sleepless night, each memory. And in that tragedy, Billie Jean King still must smile for the public, because she understands that if her life has been tied to fighting for others, even when she's exhausted, she cannot collapse in front of the world. But when the lights go out, leaving only a trembling Billie Jean King in the darkness, she wonders, is this the fiercest battle her life must endure? The years of old age don't just bring Billie Jean King battles with a betraying body. They also inflict equally cruel emotional wounds. The silent loss as loved ones leave one by one. Her parents, once steadfast, quietly proud, as they watched their daughter on the court, have passed away. Her father, the firefighter with strong shoulders who lifted her up in her early training days, closed his eyes in silence. Her mother, the woman who spent her life in the kitchen and quietly passed on enduring strength to Billie Jean, also left, taking with her a piece of the scarce childhood Billie Jean still held in her memory. Standing before their graves, Billie Jean doesn't cry aloud, only feels an emptiness in her heart. In that silence, she senses the harsh truth. The roots that nurtured her are gone, leaving her adrift in the vast emptiness of old age. Then there are her siblings, 14 children in that cramped house of yesteryear, now gradually aging, falling ill. Some are in wheelchairs, some have lost their memory, some are gone forever. The noisy family gatherings of the past are now just echoes in her mind. Billie Jean still visits, still holds the hands of those who remain, but her eyes carry sorrow. Familiar faces are fading, shared memories dissolving like smoke. Each funeral is a fresh cut, reminding her that time spares no one, not even those who were once invincible on the court. Not only has she lost family, but Billie Jean has also watched close friends, teammates from the original nine, the players who signed that fateful $1 contract, pass away one by one. They once shared sweat, laughter, and moments of fear facing an uncertain future. Now, some lie in the ground, their names only mentioned in old articles. Each time she hears of a teammate's death, Billie Jean falls silent for a long time, as if a piece of her heart is buried with them. Once, after an old friend's funeral, Billie Jean stood alone in a cemetery, the wind blowing through the trees, dry leaves rustling underfoot. The rows of cold tombstones stood as a harsh reminder. She looked around, loneliness enveloping her. Why am I still alive when everyone's leaving me behind? The question echoed in her mind, unanswered. It's the pain of the survivor, the pain of watching the world around her crumble while she persists, trudging on aching feet. These losses aren't as flashy as scandals or as loud as historic matches, but they leave deeper marks than any glory. They happen in silence, in private moments no audience witnesses. Returning home from a funeral, Billie Jean sits in her chair, staring at the empty space where friends and family once sat, feeling like a stranger in her own life. People still see Billie Jean King step onto stages, accept awards, speak boldly about gender equality and legacy. But few know that behind those lights is a woman carrying dozens of invisible graves, a heart accustomed to farewells, to final embraces, to holding hands and letting go forever. That tragedy doesn't break Billie Jean, but it ages her faster, weighs heavier in her eyes. At 82, Billie Jean King no longer fears failure or the press, but she fears silence. She fears opening her phone to more bad news, stepping into a cemetery to see another familiar face. And so, though she's won thousands of matches in her life, she still loses to the cruelest game, the game of time, where the only reward for the survivor is enduring loneliness. At 82, Billie Jean King lives in a quiet house in California, where the noise of the outside world echoes only as a distant memory. These days, she rarely appears in public, occasionally attending an award event or giving a brief interview. The image of a warrior who once shook the sports world now appears sparingly in the press on special anniversaries. The media mentions her less and less, and the younger generation, girls wielding rackets or fans cheering at screens, gradually forgets that there was a time when Billie Jean King sacrificed her youth so they could play, compete, and be paid equally to men. In her quiet home, she often spends hours by the window, morning light highlighting every wrinkle on a face marked by time. On the walls hang a few old photos, moments of her raising the Wimbledon trophy, defeating Bobby Riggs, signing that fateful $1 contract with 8 other women. Those photos are proof of an indomitable life, but now they're mere relics reminding her that glory lies in the past. Beside her chair, an old racket, the $8 one from years ago, remains a treasured keepsake. Sometimes Billie Jean touches its handle, whispering as if to an old friend, "Do they still remember me?" That question isn't just for the racket, but for the world out there. Billie Jean knows history has a short memory, that a legend can shine in one moment and be dusted over by new names, new headlines. The younger generation grows up with Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka, Coco Gauff, modern stars, and few look back at the woman who stood up in 1973 to demand fairness. The name Billie Jean King is still in books, still honored at tournaments, but in today's fast-paced world, it's become more a symbol than a living memory. The greatest tragedy isn't aging but being forgotten. A body weakening with time is something she prepared for, But a heart that once beat with the roar of crowds now facing suffocating silence, that's the real tragedy. Billie Jean was once accustomed to exploding grandstands, blazing lights, thousands of eyes following her every swing. Now, she's left with the sound of wind through the window, leaves rustling in the garden, and her own soft sighs. Occasionally, letters from longtime fans still arrive, thanking her for inspiring, for paving the way for the next generation. Billie Jean reads each line, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. She knows she hasn't been entirely forgotten, but she also understands that those who remember her are dwindling. The cruelty of time lies not just in taking health, but in erasing a person's presence from collective memory. At night, when moonlight spills into the living room, Billie Jean sits by the window, trembling hands clutching the old racket. She closes her eyes, imagining stepping onto the court for the battle of the sexes, the thunderous cheers, the eyes of young girls believing she fought for them. Then, opening her eyes, she finds only darkness surrounding her. In that darkness, Billie Jean realizes a painful truth. A legend may be immortal in history, but it's all too easily forgotten in the present. At 82, Billie Jean King lives between two worlds, a world of memories where she is forever a champion, and a world of reality where she is just a frail old woman, barely recognized on the streets. Between these two worlds lies a cold void, a loneliness that even the love of Ilana Kloss cannot fully fill. And in that void echoes the question she has whispered many times: do they still remember me? Though old age casts its shadow, though the persistent pain in her body constantly reminds her that time has won, Billie Jean King still possesses something no force can erase: her legacy. It is the legacy of a life that became a torch, lighting the way for millions of women, for those marginalized, for generations never allowed to dream. If her 82 years are a string of silent days, what she has left for the world echoes forever, like an immortal symphony. The Battle of the Sexes in 1973 was not just a sports victory but a turning point for American society. When Billie Jean defeated Bobby Riggs, it wasn't just a forehand, not just a score of 6-4, 6-3, 6-3, but a resounding declaration that women are not weak, that their value cannot be dismissed. That moment became an icon, recounted in dozens of films, hundreds of books, thousands of articles. But only Billie Jean knows that victory was paid for with nights of panic, trembling in dark rooms, silent tears no one saw. Behind the great icon was a small human, and it was that smallness that made her immortal. Then, in 1970, the decision to join 8 other women in signing a $1 contract to establish a separate tournament gave birth to the WTA, an organization that still thrives today. Every WTA season, every trophy awarded, every female athlete receiving prize money equal to her male counterparts, is vivid proof that Billie Jean King's daring and pain back then were not in vain. But few remember that to reach this point, she faced ridicule, isolation, even the risk of losing her entire career. In the eyes of history, the WTA is an empire. In Billie Jean's memory, the WTA is a series of sleepless nights, a heart pounding with fear that everything might collapse. Beyond sports, Billie Jean King became a voice for marginalized communities. After the Barnett scandal, after being forced to publicly reveal her sexual orientation in a deeply prejudiced era, she didn't choose silence or retreat. She chose to turn pain into strength, mockery into a weapon, loneliness into empathy for those like her. She became a pioneer in the LGBT rights movement, traveling the world to speak about love, acceptance, and courage. For Billie Jean, her love for Ilana Kloss was not just personal salvation, but a living testament to a fairer world, a world she knows will come, even if she doesn't live to see it fully. America didn't ignore her. In 2009, President Barack Obama awarded Billie Jean King the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor for a civilian. As the gleaming medal was placed around her neck, the entire room stood to applaud, calling her name as a hero. But in that moment, Billie Jean whispered softly, This legacy was built with blood and tears. She remembered the bloodied hands gripping the $8 racket, the nights collapsing in hotel rooms, the Barnett lawsuit, the friends who fell along the way. The metal's shine couldn't erase the darkness of those losses. It only made them sharper. 15 years later, in 2024, she was again in the spotlight, receiving the Congressional Gold Medal, an honor no female athlete had ever received. America once more recognized her not just as a tennis player but as a social warrior. But in Billie Jean's heart, that moment wasn't about the applause. It was the echo of the years she fell in silence. Amid the bright lights of the Capitol, she saw again the young girl in Long Beach, holding an old racket, practicing until she bled in the sunset. She saw the young woman standing amid public criticism, trembling but head held high. And she saw the 82-year-old woman sitting in a quiet house sighing at the question, "Do they still remember me?" Billie Jean King's legacy isn't in the number of titles, the statues, or the stadiums named after her. Her legacy lives in the hearts of young girls today who step onto the court without hearing, "Women can't do it." It lives in the laughter of same-sex couples holding hands, believing their love deserves respect. It lives in every fair contract signed, in every drop of sweat from female athletes, no longer seen as sideshows. But Billie Jean King herself understands better than anyone. No legacy comes without a terrible cost. She lost her youth, her prime, her complete love, her privacy, and her dearest loved ones. Every victory left a wound. Every medal was tied to a night of tears. The world sees glory. She sees blood and loss. The world sees an immortal legend. She sees a weary human, carrying too much. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy. To become immortal, Billie Jean King had to live a life full of blood and tears, and that paradox makes her legacy eternal. So, every time the world speaks her name, it's not just to honor her victories but to bow before a heart that broke many times, yet found the courage to keep beating until the end. In the final pages of her life, Billie Jean King emerges as a poignant paradox, both an immortal legend and a victim of the greatness she created. She is celebrated as the Queen of Tennis, a fearless warrior, a pioneer for gender equality and LGBT rights. But in the quiet moments of her 82 years, Billie Jean knows that to reach those heights, she paid more than anyone could imagine. Her childhood was stolen, her youth sacrificed, her love hidden, her privacy exposed, her health ravaged, her friends and family gone one by one. Glory, instead of a reward, became a shackle. Each trophy, each medal, both a source of pride and a deep wound. She once said, "I conquered the world, but in many moments, I lost to myself." That is the raw truth of a legend, a truth few dare to face. Billie Jean King's story offers America a bitter but necessary lesson. Courage is essential to change the world, but the cost of courage is never cheap. It's sleepless nights, scars that never heal, moments of loneliness so deep the heart feels it might stop. She bore it all so future generations could live easier, so girls today can step onto the court with shining eyes, no longer hearing, "What can girls do?" Yet, society must remember, behind a courageous figure is a flesh and blood human with pain and limits. If we only celebrate without understanding the price they paid, that celebration becomes cold, indifferent. At 82, Billie Jean King no longer steps onto the court to unleash thunderous shots or stands before cheering crowds. She lives in a quiet house, among old photos, among mementos of a turbulent life. And hanging on the wall is that old $8 wooden racket, rusted, cracked, no longer fit for play, but gleaming in memory. It's not just an object, but a witness to a journey, from a belittled girl on public courts to a woman who made the world bow. When the sunset glows, that rusted racket reflects a gentle light, not as dazzling as Wimbledon's floodlights, not as blazing as the nights of Battle of the Sexes, but a quiet, enduring light, the light of resilience, of blood and tears, of a life that never stopped fighting. In the darkness of old age, That light remains, like an eternal flame, reminding the world that a woman named Billie Jean King lived, hurt, sacrificed, and turned her pain into a legacy for humanity. And as her story closes, we remember Billie Jean King not just for her victories, but for the truth that she dared to pay the price. Her legacy isn't in the number of trophies, but in the tears shed so future generations could hold their heads high. In that quiet house, under the rusted racket that shines like an eternal flame, Billie Jean King sends a final message. Greatness is never free. Courage is the only path. And even if forgotten, the light of a heart that once burned brightly will never fade. Reading Billie Jean King's story, I carry the quiet sorrow of a nation that sometimes remembers only the cheers and forgets the sleepless nights of the trailblazer. From an $8 wooden racket and dusty public courts, bloodied hands ignited a very American spirit of self-reliance. But at Wimbledon, amid early glory, she realized every victory is a loss. The 1973 peak battle of the sexes wasn't just a 6-4, 6-3, 6-3 score. It was a moment where, had she lost, the entire women's movement could have been buried. Stepping out of the spotlight, she trembled in dark rooms, leading the original 9 to sign a $1 contract to birth the WTA. America gained a new empire, while she faced isolation, ridicule, and a body worn to exhaustion. The 1981 Barnett lawsuit forced her to come out as gay, costing million-dollar contracts, and her privacy a double wound of fame and heart. Ilana Kloss became her haven, but the scars remained. Old age brought type 2 diabetes with daily injections, eating disorders requiring hospitalization, multiple knee surgeries, and the fear of fading memory led her to confess, "I won on the court, but I'm losing to my own body." Standing in a cemetery, she asked, "Why am I still alive when everyone's left me behind?" Then returned to a quiet house, sitting by the window, looking at the old racket, whispering, "Do they still remember me?" Yet, America remembered. Presidential Medal of Freedom, 2009. Congressional Gold Medal, 2024. The lesson for us: courage must be paired with caring for the courageous fair pay, respect for LGBT dignity, investment in women's sports, prioritizing mental health, honoring trailblazers while they're still alive. This legacy was built with blood and tears. Let future generations move forward, but pay less of a price. If you cherish the sacrifices and immortal legacy Billie Jean King has left behind, please subscribe to join us in continuing to spread these deeply human stories. Thank you, and see you in the next video, where we'll keep the flame of courage burning.